Sometimes, reality is far scarier than anything a writer could conjure up. Tonight, we delve into 7 chilling tales that defy explanation and will leave you questioning everything. These are not just ghost stories or urban legends, these are experiences shared by real people who claim they lived through moments so terrifying that they wish they could forget them. Turn down the lights if you dare, but I promise you, by the end of this, you'll want to turn them back on. The first story comes from a woman who recently moved into a quaint suburban neighborhood with her young daughter. The house was charming, full of potential, but also, as she would soon discover, full of secrets. A few days after settling in, her daughter began talking about the boy in the closet. At first, she dismissed it as her child's active imagination, but things began escalating quickly. Her daughter refused to sleep in her room, claiming the boy watched her at night. One evening, the mother heard whispering coming from her daughter's room. Rushing in, she found her child fast asleep. But as she stood there, she heard it again. A low whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from the closet. When she opened it, there was nothing inside except an unsettling chill. Weeks later, she discovered through neighbors that a previous owner's child had tragically died in that same room. They moved out soon after. But she still dreams of that whisper. The second story is about a man who took a solo road trip across the country, hoping to find some clarity after a difficult breakup. One night, while driving through a desolate stretch of highway, he decided to stop at a small, run-down motel. The manager was oddly insistent that he take the room at the very end of the hall. Exhausted, he didn't argue. But as he lay in bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The room felt wrong. Heavy. At around 2 a.m., he heard soft footsteps outside his door, followed by a faint knock. He froze, waiting for whoever it was to leave. But instead, the knocking grew louder and more aggressive. Gathering his courage, he flung the door open, but the hallway was completely empty. The next morning, he mentioned it to the manager, who simply shrugged and said, "You're not the first one to say that about room 12. Needless to say, he didn't stay for a second night. The third story revolves around a group of college friends who decided to explore an abandoned asylum on Halloween night. Armed with flashlights and their phones, they entered the decrepit building, laughing and joking to mask their nervousness. The halls were filled with peeling paint, shattered glass, and graffiti. But it was the silence that unnerved them the most. No sound of animals, no wind, just an oppressive, suffocating quiet. As they reached the old cafeteria, one of them noticed fresh footprints in the thick dust on the floor. But here's the thing, none of them had stepped there yet. Suddenly, one of the flashlights died, plunging them into darkness. In that instant, they all heard it, a guttural scream echoing from the depths of the asylum. They ran out, leaving behind a phone they had accidentally dropped. When they retrieved it the next day, they found a photo on it that none of them had taken, a blurry image of what looked like a face staring directly at the camera. The fourth tale is about a young couple who moved into a historic home. Enchanted by its vintage charm, they started noticing small, odd things at first. Doors they swore they had closed were now open, and items would disappear only to reappear in strange places. One night, they hosted a dinner party, and one of their guests excused herself to use the restroom. She came back pale and shaken, claiming she had seen a woman in old-fashioned clothing standing at the top of the stairs. The couple brushed it off as a joke, but later that night, they were woken by the sound of footsteps coming from the attic. The husband went to check, armed with a baseball bat, but found nothing. As he turned to leave, the light flickered, and he swore he saw a shadow move across the room. They later learned the house had been owned by a widow who had lost her entire family in a fire and had lived alone there until her death. They moved out within the month. The fifth story involves a young man who worked the night shift at a 24-hour gas station. It was usually quiet, with the occasional truck driver stopping in for coffee. But one night, around 3 a.m., a woman walked in. She was barefoot, her clothes dirty, and she looked disoriented. She didn't respond when he greeted her, instead walking straight to the back of the store and standing there, motionless. After a few minutes, she turned and looked directly at him, her eyes filled with what he described as pure fear. Then, she simply walked out. Confused and concerned, he stepped outside to check if she needed help, but she was gone. Reviewing the security footage later, he discovered something chilling. She never appeared on the cameras, despite the fact that he had seen her with his own eyes. The sixth story is shared by a father who decided to build a treehouse for his children in the backyard. The project took several weekends, but it became a family bonding experience. However, once the treehouse was finished, his kids refused to play in it. They said it didn't feel safe. One night, unable to sleep, he decided to check it out for himself. As he climbed the ladder, he felt an overwhelming sense of unease. Inside, he found small, childlike handprints on the walls, handprints that hadn't been there before. They tore the treehouse down the next day, and to this day, he wonders what his children might have sensed that he couldn't. The seventh and final story is about a woman who inherited an old mirror from her grandmother. It was ornate, heavy, and had been in the family for generations. She placed it in her bedroom, but soon after, she started having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams of a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. One night, she woke up and thought she saw the same figure reflected in the mirror. Panicking, she turned on the light, but there was nothing there. The next morning, she decided to get rid of the mirror, but as she moved it, she noticed something carved into the back, a date and the initials of someone she didn't recognize. She later found out it belonged to a distant relative who had been institutionalized and was rumored to have practiced dark rituals. The mirror now sits in a storage unit, and she refuses to touch it again. These stories remind us that the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary is thinner than we think. Whether or not you believe in the paranormal, one thing is certain: the unknown has a way of creeping into our lives when we least expect it.